I found my daughter barefoot in the snow, shivering in thin Christmas pajamas, at 7:23 a.m. The warm glow of a festive living room spilled from the house behind her, filled with the sound of children laughing. She looked up at me, her eyes hollow, and whispered, "Daddy, I can't feel my feet." In that moment, I realized I had failed her completely. 32 years as a family therapist, and I had missed the systematic psychological torture happening to my own child. The man responsible was inside, playing the perfect grandfather, opening Christmas presents with my 5-year-old granddaughter, while my daughter froze outside as punishment for being rebellious. Pastor Nathan Whitmore had spent 3 years methodically destroying Emma's mind, and I was about to show him exactly what happens when you target a professional's family. My name is Dr. Benjamin Clark. For over 3 decades, I've specialized in one thing: pulling families out of hell. I've testified in over 200 custody cases, saved countless women from psychological warfare, and built a network of attorneys, detectives, and crisis counselors who owe me favors. I thought I'd seen every manipulation tactic in the book, but I'd never seen anyone weaponize Christmas morning itself. If you think you know how this story ends, you don't. Because what I discovered about my daughter's marriage was worse than anything I'd seen in 3 decades of treating abused families. And what I did about it, using my professional network, will show you that sometimes the coldest revenge is perfectly legal. Stay with me, because this isn't just about saving my daughter. It's about exposing how predators hide behind religious authority, and why you need to recognize these warning signs before someone you love disappears completely. 2.5 hours earlier, I'd been sitting in my Portland kitchen, nursing my second cup of coffee and watching the sunrise paint Mount Hood pink. Retirement had been good to me. At 64, I'd earned the right to peaceful mornings, crossword puzzles, and the quiet satisfaction of a career well spent. Then my phone buzzed with a text that changed everything. "Dad, can't talk now. They're watching." Christmas Eve was the message, cut off mid-sentence. I stared at those 13 words for a full minute. Emma never spoke in fragments. Even as a child, she'd been precise with language, a trait that served her well in her marketing career. The Emma I knew didn't send cryptic messages or mention being watched. She communicated clearly, directly, with the confidence of someone who'd graduated summa cum laude from Portland State and built a successful career managing digital campaigns for nonprofit organizations. Over the past 3 years, since her marriage to Joshua Whitmore, I'd watched my confident, articulate daughter gradually fade into someone I barely recognized. Phone calls became shorter, visits more infrequent. When I asked about her obvious 15-pound weight loss or the dark circles under her green eyes, Joshua would step in with smooth explanations about Emma's adjustment challenges and work-related stress. "She's been having some anxiety problems since Sophie was born," he'd said last Thanksgiving, his arm around Emma's shoulders in what looked like comfort but felt like restraint to my trained eye. "The doctor thinks she needs more rest, less stimulation from outside influences." Pastor Nathan Whitmore, Joshua's 71-year-old father, had nodded gravely from his position at the head of their dining table. "Some women struggle with the transition to biblical womanhood. Emma's learning to trust God's plan for her role as a wife and mother in our family structure." At the time, I'd attributed my growing unease to professional paranoia. After 3 decades of seeing the worst in family dynamics, maybe I was reading malice where none existed. The Whitmores were respected members of their Salem community. Nathan's Grace Community Church had grown from 50 to 394 members under his charismatic leadership. Joshua worked in his father's Whitmore construction company and seemed devoted to Emma and their 5-year-old daughter, Sophie. But that truncated text message crystallized months of accumulated worry into certainty. Something was systematically wrong. I'd driven the 156 miles to Salem through Christmas morning traffic, my mind cataloging every concerning interaction I'd witnessed over the past year. Emma's nervous laughter when Joshua corrected her in conversation, the way she'd flinch slightly when her iPhone rang. Sophie's casual comment last 4th of July about "Mommy's thinking time," when she had to stay outside during family gatherings. Emma's gradual withdrawal from her college friends, her abandoned plans for graduate school, her increasing deference to Joshua's opinions on everything from her clothing choices to her grocery purchases. Professional instincts warred with paternal denial as I pulled into the Whitmore's driveway. The three-story Victorian house looked like something from a Christmas movie. Holly wreaths on every window, multicolored lights twinkling in the early dawn, smoke curling from the brick chimney. A picture-perfect American family Christmas, worth at least $800,000, in Salem's prestigious Fairmont Hill neighborhood. That's when I found Emma, and everything clicked into horrifying focus. Now, helping her into my Honda Accord, I felt her body trembling beyond what 14-degree weather could explain. This was the deep, bone-shaking fear of someone who'd been systematically broken down over months or years. "Emma, sweetheart, how long have you been out here?" "Since 6:30 yesterday evening." Sophie had her Christmas Eve tantrum about wanting to open one present early. "And Nathan said I needed to think about my parenting failures in the cold." Her voice was flat, emotionless, a trauma response I recognized from countless clients. "He said Christmas morning discipline would teach me the importance of maintaining family standards." 18 hours. My daughter had been left outside for 18 hours in near-freezing temperatures. The front door opened with theatrical timing, and Joshua stepped out wearing flannel pajamas and a concerned expression. Behind him, I could see the warm glow of their living room, hear Sophie's excited voice calling about Santa's visit. "Benjamin, what a wonderful surprise. Emma, honey, what are you doing outside? You know, Dr. Patterson said your episodes require cooling-off periods, but I didn't realize you'd stayed out all night." His tone carried perfect, bewildered concern. "Episodes?" I kept my voice level, professional. 32 years of practice had taught me not to reveal my hand too early. "What kind of episodes?" Nathan appeared behind his son, still in his burgundy bathrobe, but commanding presence even at this early hour. At 6'3", he dominated most spaces through sheer physical authority, combined with the pastoral gravitas he'd cultivated over 4 decades of ministry. "Benjamin, welcome to our home on this blessed Christmas morning. I'm afraid Emma had another difficult evening. Sometimes tough love is the only way to break through patterns of rebellious behavior that threaten family unity." 5-year-old Sophie bounced into view, her blonde curls messy from sleep, but her face bright with Christmas excitement. She wore red Christmas pajamas, decorated with tiny reindeer, and ran to hug me with the uninhibited affection of a child who still felt safe expressing joy. Grandpa Ben, Santa found our house, but Mommy's presents are on the porch, because she wasn't good enough." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just physical neglect. It was psychological conditioning, using a child as a weapon. I scooped Sophie into my arms, forcing a smile. "Sophie, honey, Mommy's presents are on the porch, because Santa knew she needed extra special ones that wouldn't fit in the house. Let's go help her bring them in, okay?" I shot a look at Nathan and Joshua that promised a reckoning. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. I spent the next 2 hours in a carefully orchestrated dance. I feigned concern for Emma's episodes, agreeing with Joshua's fabricated narrative, while subtly gathering evidence. I asked about Dr. Patterson, noting the name for later. I observed Emma's flat affect, the way she avoided eye contact, the subtle flinches when Joshua spoke. I saw the fear in her eyes, a deep, ingrained terror that confirmed my worst suspicions. This wasn't just a bad marriage, it was a prison. When I finally got Emma alone, under the pretense of helping her retrieve her special presents from the porch, she broke down. "He said I was a bad mother, that I was poisoning Sophie's spirit with my worldly ideas. He said I needed to be broken." The words tumbled out, a torrent of suppressed trauma. She described how Nathan had systematically isolated her from friends, controlled her finances, and even altered her medication, claiming it was for her anxiety. Dr. Patterson, it turned out, was a family friend of Nathan's, a Christian counselor who was complicit in the abuse, providing diagnoses and prescriptions that kept Emma compliant. My professional network sprang into action. Within hours, my trusted legal team was drafting a temporary restraining order and a petition for emergency custody of Sophie. My private investigator began digging into Nathan's church finances and Dr. Patterson's medical licenses. My crisis counselor started preparing a safe house for Emma and Sophie. This wasn't going to be a messy divorce. It was going to be a targeted, surgical strike against a predator and his enablers. 2 days later, on Sunday morning, I walked into Grace Community Church with Emma and Sophie by my side. Nathan Whitmore was in the middle of his sermon, a fiery discourse on the importance of biblical submission for women. He paused, seeing us, his confident smile faltering. He quickly recovered, framing our presence as a testimony to God's healing power. "Benjamin Clark thinks he understands our family situation," Nathan declared, his voice booming. "But he's been poisoned by secular psychology and feminist ideology." Murmurs of support rippled through the crowd. I sat quietly in the back row, letting him build his case while I recorded everything on my phone. My son Joshua and his wife Emma have been working through some marital difficulties with prayer and biblical counseling. But Emma's father wants to impose worldly solutions on what is fundamentally a spiritual problem requiring spiritual correction. More nods. Nathan was skilled at framing complex abuse dynamics in simple theological terms that resonated with his audience. He'd had years to perfect this narrative. Emma has struggled with submission to godly authority since childhood. She's been rebellious, disrespectful, and frankly dangerous in her influence on our precious granddaughter. Sometimes loving discipline requires measures that seem harsh to those who don't understand biblical family structure. That's when I stood up. 32 years of courtroom testimony and professional presentations had taught me how to command a room's attention. "Pastor Whitmore, you're absolutely right about one thing. This is fundamentally about authority. But let's examine what kind of authority forces a mother to sleep outside in 14-degree weather while her 5-year-old daughter watches and learns that this is normal family correction." Uncomfortable shifting in the pews. Nathan's confident smile faltered slightly as his narrative was challenged by someone with equal speaking authority. "Let's talk about the kind of spiritual leadership that systematically destroys a woman's financial independence, medicates her into compliance without informed consent, and isolates her from every support system outside your direct control." I pulled out my phone, where I had compiled the evidence gathered over the past 12 hours. Financial records showing Emma's accounts had been drained and closed. Medical documentation of unauthorized medication increases from 7.5 milligrams to 15 milligrams. Screenshots of text messages from former friends explaining how Nathan had told them Emma was mentally unstable and going through demonic oppression that required them to avoid contact. And let's discuss the kind of biblical counseling that involves secretly recording a troubled woman's private moments to build ammunition for a custody battle while telling her it's therapy documentation. Joshua shot to his feet, his face flushed. She needed help documenting her episodes for Dr. Patterson. Episodes that only seemed to occur after her sleep medication was tripled without her knowledge, I countered, my voice cutting through his stammering. Episodes that were carefully edited to remove context and make normal emotional responses look like a mental breakdown. I've reviewed 6 hours of this therapeutic documentation and its systematically manipulated evidence. The congregation was silent now, the pieces falling into place. These were intelligent people who'd been gradually conditioned to accept increasing levels of control presented as spiritual growth. Confronted with the full scope of systematic abuse laid out in clinical terms, their moral clarity began reasserting itself. Emma found her voice for the first time in months, standing slowly near the front of the sanctuary. "For 3 years, I've been told that my discomfort with being controlled was rebellion against God, that my tears were evidence of spiritual weakness, that my desire to work and have friendships was selfish pride that needed to be broken." Her voice grew stronger with each sentence, the sedative fog lifting as adrenaline kicked in. "I've been drugged into compliance, financially trapped, and made to believe I was losing my mind. And when I still couldn't be broken completely, I was forced to sleep in December snow while my daughter watched and learned that this is how families show love." Nathan's facade finally cracked, his face contorted with rage as he abandoned his pastoral persona completely. "Ungrateful women like you are destroying the family unit that God established. You need strong correction to break your rebellious spirit, whatever it takes. I've built a godly family structure, and I won't let some feminist psychologist and his rebellious daughter tear it down." The congregation recoiled at his naked contempt. In that moment, They saw the man behind the spiritual authority, someone who viewed women as objects to be controlled, rather than human beings to be cherished. Church elders huddled in urgent conversation, while Nathan continued his rant about rebellious women and divine authority. Within 10 minutes, they'd voted to remove Nathan from his pastoral position, pending a full investigation into his conduct. But the damage extended far beyond one congregation. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Detective Chen had been monitoring the situation and moved when things escalated beyond family conflict into public disturbance. Search warrants had been prepared, based on my evidence gathering, targeting both the Whitmore home and Nathan's church office. Nathan was arrested that night on charges of financial fraud, child endangerment, conspiracy to commit domestic abuse, and practicing medicine without a license through the medication manipulation. The stolen money, totaling $23,000 from Emma's inheritance, would be the least of his legal problems. Joshua broke down completely when faced with his father's arrest and the reality of his own complicity. "I never wanted to hurt Emma," he sobbed to Detective Chen. "But Dad said if I didn't go along with his program, he'd cut off all financial support, turn the church against me, and make sure I never saw Sophie again." I was scared of him. His fear, while real, didn't excuse his actions, but it did provide a path for Emma to pursue a divorce with full custody. As Joshua eventually cooperated with the prosecution against his father, Dr. Patterson's license was suspended, and a full investigation into her practices began. The legal battles were long and arduous, but Emma, now free from the constant manipulation, found her strength. She testified with unwavering clarity, her voice resonating with a newfound power. She reclaimed her finances, reconnected with her friends, and, most importantly, began to heal. Sophie, initially confused and scared, thrived in a loving, stable environment, her laughter once again carefree and genuine. Nathan Whitmore was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to a substantial prison term. His empire crumbled, his reputation shattered. Joshua received a lighter sentence due to his cooperation, but the shame of his father's actions and his own complicity would follow him. The story of Emma's liberation became a cautionary tale, widely reported in the media, exposing the insidious nature of spiritual abuse and the dangers of unchecked authority. It empowered other victims to come forward, leading to a broader conversation about accountability within religious communities. These cases not only brought justice to those who might abuse spiritual or familial authority, but more importantly, they demonstrated that systematic abuse, no matter how cleverly disguised as religious discipline, would face real-world accountability in courts of law. Christmas evening found us back at Emma's apartment, playing Monopoly and sharing stories about Sophie's adventures in second grade. The simple pleasure of an unmonitored conversation, of laughter without looking over shoulders, of making plans without seeking permission. These had become precious gifts, earned through tremendous struggle and professional intervention. As I prepared to drive home to Portland, Emma hugged me with the kind of fierce gratitude that made every difficult moment of the past 2 years worthwhile. "Thank you for not giving up on me," she whispered. "Even when I'd given up on myself and couldn't see a way out. Thank you for finding your way back to yourself," I replied. "Even when the path was impossibly hard and everyone around you was telling you to accept less." The drive home through the quiet Christmas night gave me time to process how much had changed since that shocking morning when I'd found Emma freezing outside in her pajamas. The confident woman who'd hugged me goodbye bore little resemblance to the broken person I discovered on Nathan's porch 2 years earlier. But perhaps most importantly, Sophie was growing up in an environment where love was demonstrated through protection and empowerment, not control and manipulation. The cycle of abuse that had nearly consumed Emma had been decisively broken through systematic intervention and professional support. Whatever challenges lay ahead for our family, they would be faced with honesty, mutual support, and the kind of boundaries that create safety rather than fear. The Christmas lights along my route home twinkled with promise rather than the mockery I'd associated with them 2 years earlier. Emma's recovery had taught me that redemption was possible even from the most devastating betrayals, but only when coupled with accountability, genuine change, and respect for the autonomy of those who'd been harmed. Nathan's version of family values, built on submission, control, and the systematic breaking of spirits, had been exposed and legally rejected. In its place, Emma was building something authentic. Relationships based on mutual respect. Love demonstrated through empowerment rather than dominance. And the kind of spiritual foundation that encouraged growth rather than demanded compliance. Justice hadn't just been served through the legal system, it lived in Emma's restored confidence, Sophie's secure attachment to her mother, and the community's new commitment to protecting the vulnerable rather than enabling their abusers. The cold, methodical dismantling of Nathan's psychological warfare had yielded something warm and genuinely redemptive. The chance for a new generation to understand that love doesn't hurt, authority serves rather than dominates, and family should be a source of strength rather than fear. As I pulled into my driveway at 11:47 p.m., I realized that the grandfather who'd driven to Salem 2 Christmas mornings ago in desperate worry had returned home as someone different. I'd learned that professional competence couldn't substitute for vigilant love. That systematic evil required systematic resistance, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the patient support they need to save themselves. The house was quiet, decorated with simple lights that represented celebration rather than performance. Tomorrow, I'd call Emma to check on how Sophie's first post-visit transition went. Next week, I'd attend her graduate school orientation as a proud father, watching his daughter transform trauma into expertise that would help other families. But tonight, I'd rest in the knowledge that justice, real, lasting, transformative justice, had been served not through revenge or retaliation, but through the careful, persistent work of holding people accountable while creating space for genuine healing. Emma's journey from victim to survivor to advocate proved that even the most sophisticated abuse could be overcome when met with equally sophisticated resistance and the kind of love that empowers rather than controls. The final text of that Christmas evening came from Emma at 11:52 p.m. Sophie wants you to know she had the best Christmas ever. She felt safe, loved, and free to be herself. That's your grandpa gift to her, showing her what healthy family looks like. In the end, that was the greatest victory, not just stopping the abuse, but modeling something better to take its place.